Welcome back to the Dershow. Lots of interesting legal developments. Um, Pennsylvania, the arrest of Mangion, and he's getting a lawyer and challenging his being sent to New York. But before we get to that, a little Jew talk. I got about 100 emails from people saying, keep up the Jew talk. We love the Jew talk. We're Christians. We love the Jew talk. We're Syrians. We love the Jew talk. So, when it's relevant, I'll get it. And some people in the letters love the fact that I turned what was an anti-Semitic observation into something positive. So, and a number of people said I should have a separate podcast, just talk Jew talk, talking to you, Jew talk. No, I'm not going to do that. But just a little bit about Syria. Major developments in Syria. Israel obviously was concerned that Syria's army, navy, air force, and most importantly, chemical weapons could be captured by the rebels. Now, the rebels, everybody's supporting the rebels because they got rid of Assad, but the rebels are, friends of ISIS, friends of Al Qaeda. They claim they're going to reform and, they're just going to, instead of beheading their enemies, they're just going to shoot them in the head. All right, that's progress. That's progress. But I don't think you can actually trust people who are on the terrorist watch list. The United States put this organization on its terrorist list to not use chemical weapons. So Israel did a very smart thing. It did 4 or 5 things. One, it took over the Golan Heights. Remember, it has half the Golan Heights. I've been on the Golan Heights. I've actually stepped into the Syrian part of the Golan Heights, but I've been there. But the Golan Heights extends into Syria and into Israel. So Israel took over the Syrian part of the Golan Heights because that's the high ground to make sure that these terrorists don't take over. Because, Israel had a rapprochement with Syria. It wasn't perfect. But since 1974, there hasn't been overt warfare. So Israel did that in self-defense. They also destroyed the Syrian Navy because the Syrian Navy has drones and has rockets and has the ability to attack Israel. So now they sunk most of the Syrian boats, and Israel also destroyed the Syrian Air Force, which in the hands of rebels, I don't know if rebels know how to fly planes, but you have to take defensive measures. And finally, they destroyed some of the chemical weapon factories and research facilities. I have a book coming out in March or April called The Preventive State that is predicting and preempting cataclysmic harms without diminishing liberty. And it deals a lot with preventive warfare. And obviously, what Israel did in 1967 was preemptive. They knew that they were being attacked. They attacked first. They destroyed the Egyptian and Syrian air forces. What they did here is more preventive than preemptive. They weren't worried about tonight or tomorrow, an immediate attack, but they just didn't want the rebels to have access. Even the United States and Great Britain have supported what Israel has done. Of course, Turkey and Iran and Saudi Arabia have condemned them publicly, but I'm not sure privately they were so thrilled about Al-Qaeda or Taliban and others, the Islamic State, having access to chemical weapons. So I suspect that quietly they're not unhappy, but publicly they're, of course, willing to condemn. So that's the talk for today. We'll get back to that as developments warrant. So now I want to turn to the Mangione case, new developments. He gets a lawyer from Altoona. Don't know much about him. He's holding press conferences, seems to be responsible, challenging extradition, and challenging bail. He's not going to get bail. The guy had thousands of dollars of American currency and foreign currency and a passport. Obviously, he was on the way to Mexico or somewhere else. I don't know why he didn't stay on the bus and go to Mexico. He probably could have crossed over before they had his picture as big as it became. Speaking of pictures, can anybody answer this question for me? No, you won't be able to. I assure you, you're not going to be able to answer this question. His family. His family. He has family. He has a large family. It's a wealthy, large family in Baltimore, in the outskirts of Baltimore. They own golf courses. They own nursing homes. They own. They're philanthropic. They're in politics, and they know that their son has been through a terribly painful back operation, probably on painkillers. We don't know. He's gone off the grid for several months. He's completely disappeared. So that's fact one that they know. Then they read the newspapers, they see television, they know that somebody killed the CEO of that insurance company. And then they see the picture. I'm not talking about the picture with the mask. I'm talking about the picture that they had from several days earlier, where you see his whole face. You don't see the top of his head. You see his face. Does any mother, does any father, does any sibling, does any relative, any cousin not recognize that guy and not know that he's the guy that they're looking for? How do you not put one and one together and get two? Now, CNN's expert commentator got it wrong on television a couple of hours ago when she said that it is a crime in America if you know somebody is guilty and you know that he's wanted to fail to report that person to the authorities. Wrong, wrong, wrong. It's not a crime. It's a crime in some European countries. It's not a crime to America. Take it most extreme. Even if the person is living next to you, even if the person is, your friend and your relative, and you know for certain he's the one he's wanted, you are not under a criminal law obligation to turn that person in. You're under a criminal law obligation not to harbor that person, not to do anything affirmative to protect him and to prevent law enforcement authorities from getting them. It gets us close to something I've written an article about just recently, sanctuary cities and why they might be unconstitutional. But you can't take affirmative steps to prevent the police from finding him, but you are under no obligation, no legal obligation, punishable by criminal law, to report him. Now, you might ask the following question. What if he then went out and committed another crime, killed somebody else or hurt somebody, after his family knew that they were looking for him? That, reminds me, of course, of the Kaczynski case, the Unabomber, where his brother knew that he was the Unabomber, but he wasn't concerned enough that he might commit new crimes. But when he finally did commit new crimes, the brother finally turned him in. Would there be civil tort liability against members of the family who you could prove, civil standard by a preponderance of the evidence, knew that their son, cousin, relative, whatever, was the guy they wanted and didn't do anything? No criminal liability, but should there be civil liability if he then goes out and commits another crime? Fascinating question. I mean, criminal law is so interesting. That's why I love teaching it. For 50 years, I taught it, and almost every week somebody comes up to me somewhere. I was in your criminal law class. I don't remember very much about, specific criminal law, but I remember what you told me first day of class. You said statistically, more of you out there, Harvard students, more of you will become criminal defendants than criminal lawyers. They all love that. They go, oh my God, we're going to become criminal defendants. It's been true. Over the years, very few of my students have become criminal defense lawyers. Many have become prosecutors. One became the police chief of New York. I mentioned her yesterday. Jessie Tisch, very proud of her. I'm very proud of all my students. But very few have become actual criminal defense lawyers. Harvard and Yale students don't lower themselves to represent bad people like I do. Only a Harvard professor would do that. But some have become criminal defendants. I've represented a couple of them who graduated Harvard Law School. Some of them should have become criminal defendants, didn't yet. We'll see what happens. That's that issue. Will we learn more about it? Will we find out that relatives should have done a lot more to prevent this, to to prevent him from escaping than they did. And then you ask yourself the moral question: what if you are the father and you love your son and you realize that's your son? First of all, I'm the father. I would try to make a deal immediately. Say, please don't shoot him. We'll get him to surrender. But the possibility of a fugitive being shot is also very high. So let's now turn to the subject at hand. Does he have any defenses? Now, he doesn't have any defenses on the actual merits of whether he did it. I'm believing for a moment what the news reports have said. Generally, I'm very skeptical of news reports, but I'm believing that he had a statement, a 3-page statement, in which he essentially admitted he did it and thought it was the right thing, and that there is a gun that may be able to be traceable to the gun who did the killing. Maybe there's some DNA on a water bottle, on candy wrappers that matches DNA. Assuming all that for a second, are there any defenses? Well, there are 3 or 4 types of defenses you could make here. One, the evidence was obtained unlawfully. As soon as I read in the newspapers, they said, well, on his person, they found a gun. No, they didn't find a gun on his person. Oh, they found clothes, other clothes that matched the clothes on his person. No, they didn't find it on his person. People don't carry that gun. Yeah, the statement, the 3-page statement, maybe they found that on his person. I don't know. Maybe they found on his person probably the passport and the money. But the other stuff they found in a case, in a knapsack, in a backpack, something he was holding, something in his possession. Remember, when they arrest him, he's sitting down at McDonald's, and where do you think the briefcase is? It's probably next to him. I doubt that he's gripping it in his arms like this. Now, the law is not completely clear on this, but in general, the law is this: if he is separate from the bag and he can't easily get to it, and the police have it in their possession so that he can't reach into it and get a gun, generally, the police at that point, even if they have probable cause, and even if the search is incident to the arrest, it's questionable whether they have the right to actually go into the bag, open the bag, take out the 3-page manuscript, front page. Maybe they have the right to look at it because it's right there in plain view. There's what's known as the plain view doctrine. But can they then go to page 2? Can they go to page 3? Can they read and rummage through this without getting a warrant? Now, you might say, of course they'd get a warrant. It takes a second to get a warrant, and it would be so easy. There's so much probable cause in this case. But the question is, did they get a warrant? And the question is, will they try to introduce into evidence the 3-page statement and other things they may have found in the case, not on his person? You can search his person. You can search anywhere where you think he might pose a danger to you. But if they have the bag and they're holding it 10 feet away, hard case to make that it had to be searched incident to an arrest. The courts are very sympathetic to police doing searches like this, but at least that's a plausible argument that could be made. The second argument is just a civil disobedience argument, and his lawyers won't be able to make it, but might be able to pick a jury that would be somewhat sympathetic to what he did and might engage in civil disobedience and acquit because the victim was deserving. You go online, there's a lot of that going on. It's called jury nullification. It's not legal, but it happens. Unlikely to work in this case. All you need is one juror. So conceivably, you get one juror who had a problem with the insurance company. Of course, that jury would probably be excluded because one of the questions that they would ask on voir dire is, did you ever have a claim turned down by an insurance company? So the third possible defense is a mental illness defense, sometimes called an insanity defense, sometimes diminished responsibility, which is not a full defense, it's a mitigation. And the argument would go something like this. Here's a guy who's living a normal life. University of Pennsylvania, valedictorian in his high school class, gets into the Honor Society for Engineering. Seems like a really decent guy. Then something happens. He has a really bad, serious back problem, goes in for surgery, and he comes out a different person. Maybe he's loaded with painkillers. I don't know. Maybe he's on fentanyl. Who knows? I don't know. Now, voluntary drug taking is generally not a defense, but if the voluntary drug taking initiated a process which culminated in a full-blown psychosis or schizophrenia, maybe he has some kind of an argument. In New York, insanity is a defense. Pennsylvania, interesting, where he was arrested, insanity is not a defense. I had a case there. I represented a billionaire from a very, very prominent family who killed his best friend, thinking he was a Russian spy, the best friend. And it was clear he was psychotic. When I spoke to him, I would have rational conversations with him, and then he would say, "Oh, it's time for me to leave because I have to become the Dalai Lama." And he believed he was the Dalai Lama after 5 o'clock at night when the light came back in wherever the Dalai Lama was at a particular period of time. He's clearly mentally ill. But in Pennsylvania, the verdict is guilty and insane, guilty and mentally ill. And with that verdict, you're guilty and you're supposed to go to a mental hospital. In my case, they didn't even send him to a mental hospital, and I didn't do the trial. I just did the appeal. And he died in prison while proceedings were still pending. So we never got an absolutely definitive final result in the case. You may remember the case. It was pretty well known. The defendant was a DuPont, and he killed the world wrestling champion, who was his best friend, named Schultz. He killed him in cold blood. And he absolutely, honestly believed that a Russian spy had taken over his body and was about to kill him. It's just, those are my cases, ladies and gentlemen. I don't pick them, they pick me. So that was a fascinating case. But don't know what the mental situation is with this young man. Something has to explain what turned him from a rational, good student and a guy who all of his fraternity brothers and friends say was the last person in the world we'd ever imagine doing anything like that. And so the claim would be it wasn't him who did it. It was a different person. It was somebody who was the product of a serious mental illness and maybe painkillers, maybe drugs. We don't know. It's an uphill defense and probably won't prevail. But on the other hand, if you get a sympathetic jury, sympathetic to him because of who the victim was and sympathetic to mental illness, and you get one or two jurors holding out, who knows? Other than that, it would seem like a pretty open and shut case. And I still wonder, this guy seemed to have been so good at the horrible thing he did, getting away on the bike and then getting away and getting on a bus. Why he didn't take the bus all the way to the Mexican border and just get lost and cross over. He never would have been recognized. I don't think he would have been recognized in Mexico. People I've spoken to about this case say, well, he wanted to get caught. No, I don't believe that. I don't think he wanted to get caught. And his outburst in front of the courthouse today, where he said, screamed at the American public, etc., does not suggest that he wanted to get caught. And he's challenging extradition, and he's challenging his denial of bail. Of course, he's not going to ever get bail. And it's very unlikely that he'll ever see the light of freedom for the next 15, 20, 25 years, depending on what the sentence is. By the way, a lot of people have asked me, and it's in the email, why has he been indicted for second-degree murder? Not first-degree murder. Second-degree murder sounds like it's less premeditated, less accidental. Hey, quirks of New York. New York defines first-degree murder as killing a policeman, killing a guard, killing a witness, but not ordinary premeditated first-degree murder. You go in, you plan for a month, you wait for the opportunity, you kill a completely innocent person, shoot him right in the head, second-degree murder. That's what it is. It's not unpremeditated. It's premeditated. It's what most states call first-degree murder, but in New York it's called second-degree murder. So don't get confused. A couple of the television stations mistakenly said he was being indicted for first-degree murder, but he wasn't. It's second-degree murder because of the strange New York law. I doubt that this lawyer will be the one who will try the case in New York. I suspect they will get a high-profile lawyer who has some experience in mental illness and some experience in cases like this. There are plenty of them in New York, and there are plenty of them who would love to have a high-profile case, even if it means losing. Lawyers are perfectly willing to lose as long as they get, in this case, probably paid well for a very wealthy family. I don't know if he'll maintain a relationship with his family. Who knows? And the issue of his family may come up at the trial, and the lawyer, if he's paid by the family, is going to have a possible conflict if the question arises at the trial. I don't know how it would, but it might. Why the family didn't turn him in. But the family is obviously going to pay for this. He didn't have enough money in his pocket to pay for this lawyer, and the money he had in his pocket was seized anyway as evidence. He's not going to be able to get access to that for quite a while. So probably some high-profile New York lawyer, I could name 10, who would do excellent jobs in defending him. Probably won't win, but they would do excellent jobs in defending him. And so we'll see where it goes from here. He will be extradited. You can bet 100% on that. The evidence will almost certainly not be excluded. There's maybe 5% chance it would be, maybe 10%. He'll raise it, but probably lose on that issue and probably lose on the mental illness issue as well. But, the question really is, will he get an instruction on the mental illness issue? If he gets an instruction on the mental illness issue, then he has a slight chance of getting one or two jurors to hold out. You need more than one juror to hold out. What I think happened, by the way, in the Penny case, I suspect there was only one or two jurors who held out for the upper charge, and then they just gave up because otherwise, they would have, the people who voted that he was guilty, if there were 6 or 7 of them, they would have stayed with that for the lower offense, because the standards are lower for negligent homicide than they are for manslaughter. And if somebody thought he was guilty of manslaughter, a fortiori, he was guilty of negligent homicide. But they gave up. They said, what the heck, we tried, we got a hung jury in the other. We're not going to win this thing. We don't want a hung jury. Let's just vote to acquit. That's probably what happened. Generally, you need at least 3 or 4, unless you have some 1 or 2 who are, 12 angry men. Generally, if you have only 1 or 2, in the end, the 10 or 11 persuade the 1 or 2, and that seems to be what happened here. Okay, so lots of letters today. Let's see what happens. Oh, a lot of this. I'm not Jewish, but I really enjoy the Jew talk when it occurs on your show. Don't listen to that fool. Here's one guy who says, a small part of me, this guy might be on the jury, is going to think about this guy fondly next time and every time I get the runaround from an insurance company. So you never know who you're going to get, and social media and all of that. Okay. Oh, this is a good one. We need a good Samaritan law to protect those with courage, to protect innocent people from harm. Yeah, there is a good Samaritan law in many jurisdictions, but it applies primarily to civil liability. If you stop and you try to break up a crime, you can't be sued if it goes wrong. But for criminal liability, there should be a law that says, if you did the right thing initially, and even the prosecutions admitted he did the right thing initially, that even if you go too far, and even if you were engaged in negligence, no, the fact that you were a good Samaritan should protect you from a criminal liability. That makes a lot of sense to me. It's not the law now in New York, but I think an amendment to the law of New York might be a viable thing. Okay. Here's one that's unsympathetic. The nutcase, that's what he describes him as, the nutcase that apparently shot the United Healthcare CEO just threw his life away for what? Total insanity. This young man was highly educated, had a good job in computers, was apparently well-liked. What caused him to throw away his life? A real tragedy for all. But I'm seeing that, with the internet. The people who are today marching for Hamas and calling for death to the Jews, they're not going to get jobs. I certainly wouldn't hire them. I urge you not to hire them. And they're throwing away their lives for something they know nothing about. They don't know what they're talking about. They didn't protest the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who were killed in Syria, or the hundreds of thousands of people who were killed in Darfur and Sudan, or the many who have been killed by the Chinese, or the Kurds that have been killed. No, they only protested because it's the in thing to do. Protest Jews, support the Palestinians, become an advocate of Palestinianism, the weakest human rights cause that I have ever seen in my 60 more, it's now probably 70 years of defending human rights. I've never seen a weaker case for human rights than Palestinianism, but it's the strongest case on college campuses today because college students, the one thing they're taught not to do is think for themselves. No, you don't think for yourself. You listen to your idiot professors and your idiot fellow students, and then you do what they do. So it crosses issues. Okay, under arrest, police authorities have the right to search for weapons and to review inventory and all other arms for identification. That's a correct statement of the law. You are allowed to inventory things. The question is, are you allowed to open them up? I won a case not so long ago where they had the right to seize the medicine bottles in the cabinet and inventory them. What they didn't have the right to do was open them up and check what was inside. There's no justification for that. Nobody's life is at risk. And you don't have to inventory every pill. All you have to do is inventory the bottle. So the police shouldn't go beyond the scope of what they are permitted to do when they conduct a search. They do it all the time, and the courts sustain it. Okay. I love it. The new name for your show, Jew Talk with Alan Dershowitz. No, we're not going to have a separate show, but continue to do it when necessary. Okay, here's one that's just dead wrong. This is just the opposite of elitism, anti-elitism. Unfortunately, Jessie Tisch would never have even been considered for police commissioner had her family not been owners of the Tisch organization and had she not been an heiress to billions of dollars. Sad fact. Totally, totally false. When I had Jessie as a student, nobody knew who her family was. Nobody in Boston knows the name. She did very well. She was a great student. And then what did she do? She could have gotten a job anywhere in any law firm just based on her grades. Doesn't matter what her name was. Instead, she went to work for $30,000 a year as a uniform policeman walking the beat. And she worked her way up, and she became an intelligence officer in the New York Police Department. And she excelled, and then she became head of the intelligence unit. And she got this job on the merits. Just because you're rich doesn't mean you're not smart and doesn't mean you're not deserving. So I fundamentally disagree with that. I think she would have gotten this job no matter what her race, religion, background, and wealth status was. And we shouldn't discriminate against the rich anymore. You know, the Bible says don't discriminate against the poor, but it also says don't discriminate against the rich. And the attack or the criticism of Jessie Tisch is a wrong-headed criticism based on a failure to know how good she really is. Last question. Professor, you should help the Republican DA candidate who's going to run against Bragg. She seems good. Your endorsement may help her. Well, I'll tell you right now, I will endorse anybody who runs against Bragg or anybody who runs against Fani Willis, but I'm not yet in a position to decide who to endorse affirmatively. I want to see what the range of candidates are. Okay, see you.